The year's 2025, and if you're paying attention, the warning sirens are deafening. The same patterns, the same mistakes, the same delusional confidence that preceded the greatest economic catastrophe in modern history. They're not just similar, they're identical. Most people see Bitcoin at all-time highs and think innovation. They see stock markets hitting records and think prosperity. They see gold breaking $3,800 and think safety. But the smart money sees something entirely different. They see 1929 all over again. When people think about the Great Depression, they picture breadlines and soup kitchens. But the real story isn't what happened after the crash, it's what led up to it. The Roaring Twenties weren't just about jazz clubs and flappers. They were about a financial bubble so massive, so intoxicating, that an entire nation convinced itself the party would never end. Sound familiar? Because here's what should terrify you. Every single warning sign that preceded the 1929 crash is flashing red right now. Not metaphorically, literally. The wealth inequality, worse than 1929. The speculative mania, worse than 1929. The easy credit, worse than 1929. The denial from those in power, exactly like 1929. We're not heading toward a repeat of history. We're already living it. The only question is whether you'll recognize the pattern before it's too late to protect yourself. Let me paint you a picture of America in 1928. The stock market had been climbing for nearly a decade. Everyone, from shoeshine boys to millionaires, was playing the market. Credit was flowing like champagne at a Gatsby party. People were buying stocks on margin, borrowing up to 90% of the purchase price. They were taking loans against their homes, convinced that prosperity was permanent. The newspapers called it the new economy. Politicians promised that boom and bust cycles were a thing of the past. Technology, radio, automobiles, electricity was going to change everything forever. Does any of this sound familiar? It should, because we're living through the exact same delusion right now, only bigger. Welcome to 2025. Bitcoin just crossed $100,000. Not because of utility, but because everyone believes someone else will pay more tomorrow. The S&P 500 is at all-time highs, despite corporate earnings being flat or declining for 2 years. Gold hit $3,500 per ounce, a record, because even gold bugs know something is terribly wrong with paper assets. Real estate prices are 40% higher than they were in 2019, while the average American's income has barely budged. And here's the kicker. Mortgage rates are at 7%, yet home prices keep climbing. People are stretching themselves thinner than ever, borrowing record amounts for homes they can barely afford, convinced that real estate always goes up. Total U.S. household debt just crossed $17.5 trillion. That's trillion with a T. Consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt. Every category has exploded to levels that would have been unimaginable even a decade ago. But it's fine, right? Because this time is different. Listen, if you want to protect your savings from what's coming, if you want to understand how to position yourself on the right side of this collapse, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Because when the crash comes, it will move faster than your ability to react. And by the time the mainstream media admits there's a problem, it will already be too late. We cover the warning signs, the historical patterns, and most importantly, the strategies to not just survive, but potentially profit when everyone else is panicking. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to show you next will change how you see every financial decision you make from this point forward. The Federal Reserve's role, then and now. In the 1920s, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates artificially low to stimulate growth. Banks were lending money to anyone with a pulse. Speculation wasn't just encouraged, it was celebrated as patriotic. The idea that markets could fall seemed absurd to most Americans. After all, stocks had only gone up for so long that an entire generation had never experienced a real crash. Then, meet now. We've had over 15 years of near zero interest rates. From 2008 to 2022, money was essentially free. And even now, despite the Fed's tough talk, real interest rates are still historically low. Money has been so cheap for so long that entire industries exist only because of easy credit. Venture capital funds throw billions at companies that have never turned a profit and never will. WeWork, Uber, Lyft, all sustained by the promise of future profitability that never materializes. Cryptocurrency speculation makes the stock market gambling of the 1920s look conservative. People are taking out second mortgages to buy digital tokens based on dog memes. NFTs sold for millions. Crypto exchanges collapsed overnight, vaporizing billions. And still, the mania continues. And just like in 1929, anyone who suggests this might end badly is dismissed as a pessimist who doesn't understand the new paradigm. But paradigms don't change. Math does not negotiate. Gravity always wins. Here's the part that should keep you awake at night. The wealth gap today is actually worse than it was in 1929. In the late 1920s, the top 1% controlled about 23% of all wealth in America. That concentration was considered obscene. It was one of the factors that made the Depression so devastating. Today, that number is over 32%. The top 1% now controls more wealth than the entire middle class combined. The concentration of assets in the hands of a few elite families and institutions has reached levels that would have shocked even the robber barons of the Gilded Age. This matters. And here's why. When wealth concentrates at the top, consumption at the bottom eventually collapses. The rich can only buy so many cars, so many houses, so much food. Real economic growth comes from the broad middle class having money to spend. But when that middle class is drowning in debt, student loans, credit cards, medical bills, while assets inflate beyond their reach, the foundation of the entire economy starts to crack. In 2025, the average American can't afford a $1,000 emergency expense, a house in the city where they work, healthcare without going bankrupt, retirement without working into their 70s. Meanwhile, billionaires are buying $500 million yachts and launching themselves into space for fun. This isn't sustainable. It wasn't in 1929. It isn't now. In 1929, ordinary Americans were leveraged to the hilt. They bought stocks on margin, meaning they put down just 10% and borrowed the rest. When prices started to fall, margin calls forced them to sell at exactly the wrong time, amplifying the crash into a catastrophic spiral. Today, we have a different kind of leverage, but it's everywhere, and it's bigger. Corporate debt. U.S. corporate debt has exploded to over $11 trillion. Companies that should have failed years ago are kept alive by cheap debt, refinancing constantly, never actually paying anything down. They're zombies, and when rates stay elevated, they'll collapse en masse. Government debt. The U.S. national debt just crossed $36 trillion. We're paying over $1 trillion per year just in interest. That's more than we spend on defense, more than Medicare, just interest on money we already borrowed. Consumer debt. Americans now owe $1.6 trillion in student loans, $1.1 trillion in credit card debt, $12 trillion in mortgages, many at rates they can barely afford. The entire system is built on the assumption that tomorrow will always be better than today, that incomes will rise, that asset prices will climb forever, that we can always refinance, always borrow more, always kick the can down the road. And just like in the 1920s, the people in charge keep insisting that this time is different. Central bankers talk about soft landings and controlled inflation. Politicians promise that government spending will create prosperity. Tech billionaires claim their companies are worth more than entire nations because of revolutionary breakthroughs that will change everything. The same arrogance, the same delusion, the same refusal to acknowledge that what goes up must eventually come down. But there's something even more dangerous about our situation today. In 1929, most Americans still lived on farms or in small towns. They had skills. They could grow food, fix things, build shelter. They could survive without complex systems. Today, we're utterly dependent on supply chains that span the globe, dependent on digital payment systems that can be shut off with a keystroke, dependent on just-in-time delivery that keeps grocery stores stocked, dependent on institutions that exist only because of confidence and credit. When that confidence breaks, and it will break, the collapse won't just be financial, it will be civilizational. Think about what happens when banks freeze withdrawals. They have the legal right. Digital payment systems go down for even 48 hours. Grocery stores can't restock because trucking companies can't get credit for fuel. Power grids fail because utilities can't pay for maintenance. The smart money already knows this. That's why billionaires are buying farmland at record prices. Bill Gates now owns more farmland than anyone in America. That's why they're building luxury bunkers in New Zealand and remote mountain ranges. That's why central banks are quietly accumulating gold while telling everyone else it's a barbarous relic. That's why insider trading by members of Congress reached record levels in 2024. The people with access to real information are positioning themselves for what's coming. Meanwhile, the general public is being fed the same soothing lies that pacified Americans in 1928. Everything is fine. The economy is strong. Technology will save us. The government has tools to prevent another depression. Trust the experts. Don't panic. Here's what the experts won't tell you. The tools they used to fight the last crisis have created an even bigger bubble. The money printing, the bailouts, the zero interest rates. They didn't solve the underlying problems. They just postponed them and made them worse. The 2008 financial crisis should have been a painful but necessary correction. Instead, we papered over it with $4 trillion in printed money and more debt. The 2020 COVID crash should have exposed the fragility of our just-in-time economy. Instead, we printed another $5 trillion and pretended everything was fine. And now we're facing a reckoning that will make 1929 look like a practice round. The crash of 1929 didn't happen overnight. It was preceded by months of warning signs that most people either ignored or rationalized away. Stock prices had become completely disconnected from the actual value of the companies they represented. RCA, the Tesla of its day, was trading at 500 times earnings. People convinced themselves that traditional valuation metrics didn't apply to revolutionary new technologies. Sound familiar? Today we have companies worth hundreds of billions that have never made a meaningful profit. Electric vehicle startups valued higher than Ford and GM combined. No factories, no revenue, just promises. AI companies trading at multiples that would have been considered insane, even at the height of the dot-com bubble. Social media platforms valued in the trillions, despite declining user growth and advertising revenue. The justifications are always the same. This time is different. We're in a new era. The old rules don't apply. But gravity always wins. And in October 1929, when reality finally reasserted itself, the fall was swift and merciless. Between September and November of that year, the Dow Jones lost nearly 50% of its value. Fortunes built over decades vanished in weeks. Banks that had seemed unshakable collapsed. The confidence that had fueled the entire system evaporated like morning mist. What's terrifying about our current situation is that the vulnerabilities are even more extreme than 1929. In 1929, most speculation was concentrated in stocks. Today, bubbles exist everywhere simultaneously. Real estate, prices that defy all economic logic. In major cities, homes cost 15 to 20 times the median household income. Historically, 3 to 4 times was considered the maximum sustainable ratio. Bond markets, propped up by central bank manipulation. When they stop buying, who will, and at what price? Cryptocurrency, markets that swing by trillions based on tweets. No underlying value, just greater fool theory on a global scale. Private equity, valuations that exist only because money has been free for so long that investors have forgotten what risk actually means. The interconnectedness makes it worse. In 1929, when banks failed, they failed individually. Today, the entire global financial system is so interwoven that a crisis anywhere becomes a crisis everywhere in hours, maybe minutes. Algorithmic trading can amplify crashes at speeds that would have been unimaginable in the 1920s. When the selling starts, it won't just be fast, it will be instantaneous and brutal. And unlike 1929, we don't have the luxury of starting from a sound foundation. Consider what's already happening beneath the surface. Commercial real estate is quietly collapsing as remote work, and online shopping hollow out office buildings and shopping malls. Banks are sitting on hundreds of billions in losses they can't acknowledge without triggering runs. Regional banks failed in 2023. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. The contagion was stopped only by emergency government intervention. But the underlying problems haven't been fixed. They've been hidden. Pension funds are making increasingly desperate bets to meet obligations they know they can't fulfill. State pension funds are only 70% funded on average, and that's using optimistic assumptions about future returns. The cracks are spreading, but the media and politicians keep painting over them with optimistic narratives and creative accounting. The social fabric is fraying too. In the 1920s, despite the inequality, most Americans still believed in the system and trusted their institutions. Today, trust in government, media, and financial institutions is at historic lows. When the next crisis hits, it won't just be an economic collapse. It will be a legitimacy crisis that could tear apart the social contract itself. Yet the response from those in power remains the same as 1929. Denial, deflection, doubling down on the policies that created the problem. Central bankers speak in riddles about transitory inflation and soft landings. Politicians promise that more spending and more debt will somehow create prosperity. Corporate executives buy back their own stock, inflating prices artificially, while their companies lose money. The delusion is total and absolute. But history teaches us that reality has a way of breaking through even the most elaborate fantasies. In 1929, the reckoning came suddenly and without warning to those who had convinced themselves it could never happen. The same willful blindness exists today, amplified by social media echo chambers and a financial press that profits from perpetuating optimism. The smart money isn't just preparing for a correction. They're positioning for a complete reset of the global financial system. They understand that when this bubble finally bursts, it won't just take down over-leveraged speculators and weak companies. It will take down currencies, governments, and the entire post-war economic order that has defined our world for 80 years. The only question left is timing. But even that follows historical patterns. Market tops are always accompanied by maximum euphoria and minimum concern about risk. Check political leaders dismiss warnings as fear-mongering. Check academic experts explain why this time really is different. Check the general public borrows against assets they believe can only go up. Check every box on the pre-crash checklist has been ticked. The stage is set. The actors are in position. And just like in 1929, most people will be shocked when the curtain finally falls and they see what was really happening behind the elaborate performance. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. The parallels between 2025 and 1929 aren't coincidences. They're warnings written in the language of markets, debt, and human nature. The same arrogance that convinced Americans in 1928 that prosperity was permanent is alive and well today, just dressed up in new technology and modern jargon. The crash is coming. The only questions are when, how severe, and which side of it you'll be on. Those who understand history have a chance to prepare. Those who ignore it will learn its lessons the hard way, just as millions did nearly a century ago. The echoes are getting louder. Are you listening? If this opened your eyes to what's really happening, if you want to know how to protect your wealth before the next crash, subscribe to The Wealth Forum right now. Because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand exactly what happened and why. History has the answers, and history is screaming a warning. The only question is, will you hear it in time?